However, saying that there are giant space women, the size of galaxies, that fly in flocks across the universe, is a little bit different. If such ideas are symbolism, it's bizarre symbolism. Something akin to some kind of acid trip. However, if these ideas are meant to be taken literally, what do they truly mean? Surely these ideas belong in the fantasy section of any good bookstore. But instead the books relating to Falun Gong are publicised as genuine spiritual advice. Some of the other ideas belonging to this belief include the claim that inside your mind there is a spiritual other-dimensional mirror which faces downwards, which keeps you, well, away from enlightenment. You're focused on other things. And through the techniques of Falun Dafa, you will turn around that mirror to face upwards, and thus link to higher conscious, and so, over time, reach enlightenment. There's the claim that their spirituality is the only true spirituality, the ultimate path. Of course, other ways do exist, but they are not the strong way. They are not the right way. They are not the true path to genuine enlightenment. Something else said by the leader and founder, Master Li, although most probably symbolic, is the idea that the oceans are God's tears. Such statements are common as being symbolic within religion. The idea of God's tears or some other such analogy or symbolic nature to things. Whereas other ideas are not as symbolic. They're stated as a fact. And when such ideas are stated, phrased in such a way as to be said to be literally true, what excuse can be presented? A good example is when it's been said that there's black people, there's white people, there's Asian people, all people of the world, but also flower-skinned people. Is this meant to be some kind of symbolism? Also the idea that different races should not interbreed. It's been said on a few occasions, possibly the context might mean something in that way. Okay, what about premarital sex? No premarital sex. Because apparently Master Li is enlightened. No homosexuality, that's written off too. And it should be believed because an enlightened man has said it. Except, of course, there is no real way of objectifying what is enlightenment. People can simply say opinions. They've been convinced of an idea of a person being enlightened. But what does that really mean? It seems to me that the only real grounds of saying that a person is enlightened is the appearance of enlightenment. Acting in an enlightened way, in the right circumstances, and having enough people who believe you is enough to be accepted as being an enlightened person around your following, the believers who surround you. And if that's enough to be enlightened, then, well, which religious or cult leader isn't enlightened? Surely they all believe, or at least many of them, that they're enlightened because they have the right beliefs, or they have read the right words, or followed the right practice, or done sufficient amounts of meditation and accepted the right ideas. So the idea of enlightenment it's a bit overrated. An interesting quote from Master Li is that every grain of sand contains 3,000 planets with intelligent life. So he's saying there is, perhaps philosophically you could argue, in every grain of sand there is a universe, or a galaxy. But then he's being overly specific, which takes it away from the philosophical, metaphorical view, and saying there are 3,000, not 3001, not 2,999, but 3,000 inhabited planets with intelligent life in each grain of sand. If this is meant to be some kind of analogy for something, I'm afraid it's lost in translation. An idea held by the devout is that your physical health is directly affected by your spiritual health, and therefore physical ailments can be caused and indeed cured by spiritual practice. As a result, many people who follow Falun Dafa, Falun Gong, do not go and see a doctor until it's serious. Some people don't even go when it is serious, believing they can cure any form of ill by simple spiritual techniques. Although many members might seek medical attention if they have a genuine complaint, especially in the Western and developed world, there are many people who still would not seek medical attention for serious conditions. As a result, people have died, either dying of conditions they need not suffer with, or simply dying prematurely by not seeking proper medical attention. With this idea in mind, it's understandable how some members would assume that a seemingly physical problem would in fact be a spiritual problem or disorder, and so they would imagine that they can cure this problem by spiritual means. Not willing to go and see a doctor, assuming it must be spiritual, they would focus on their trance meditations and other practices, trying to cure it by energy means. Meanwhile, the actual condition itself, going unchecked, depending on the condition itself, what it is, could easily become far more dangerous and potentially life-threatening to the individual. It seems obvious to me that Master Li is the centre of this belief. It is understandable. After all, he is the founder. He is the man who claims to be enlightened, the man who's written many books, and basically created this religion. But where is the line drawn between a spiritual prophet and a cult leader? A person who brings forward a version of truth, and a person who's created a cult around himself. In many ways it could be argued that Master Li is in fact a probable narcissist with delusions of grandeur. He likes to have people admire him and his view. And reportedly, according to people who've now left the group, he may well have a terrible temper. But of course such things can be merely stories, rumours, things said by people who perhaps have an axe to grind. Whether or not they actually have experience of the things they claim is another story altogether. But if we talk about the critics having conspiracy theories, rumours, and hearsay, what about Falun Gong itself? One widely spoken idea is that members of this belief, 5,000 of them, were rounded up, taken to a hospital in southern China, where they were killed and their organs harvested for the Chinese government to use in hospitals. A disturbing idea, to say the least. However, is there evidence for this conspiracy and this genocide, this organ harvesting in communist China? Since communism took power in China, there have been many cases of organ harvesting. Organ donation in mainstream Chinese society is a taboo, due to the idea that if you donate your organs, you're no longer whole. In the period of Chinese history under Mao, it was commonplace to take organs from people who were on death row. However, it has been diminishing over the years. This practice has been not phased out completely, but is far less common than it ever was. Although obviously the Chinese government doesn't seem to care too much about human rights at the best of times, is there actually any evidence of this recent genocide? Now, it is a fact that the Chinese government did use, non-consensual organ harvesting of people who were, sentenced to death. But that's a bit different from rounding up 5,000 people or more, as people who support Falun Gong claim. However, there is a lack of evidence for a genocide-like action being carried out by the Chinese government. Numerous journalists have investigated, and I'm not just talking about the Chinese. Amnesty International, a well-known and I would say quite impartial organisation which focuses on human rights on many different fronts, found no evidence at all of this genocide and organ and blood harvest. The claims made are not sufficient to say they are correct. There is not sufficient evidence to say that mass organ harvesting took place, a genocide of 5,000 people, or for that matter 1,000 people. The hospital has been visited and has been found to be not a place of genocide. And if there has been a cover-up, it's been an extremely good cover-up by the Chinese. Would the Chinese government do it? I would not put it past them. However, in a court of law, mere suspicion is not enough to convict a defendant. So it either never happened, or it happened and the Chinese government covered up every single piece of evidence perfectly. But of course, without any evidence, we can't say that it did happen. So the safest approach is to say we do not know. Suspicion is not enough to say a person, or in this case an entity, the Chinese government, is actually guilty. Pointing out genuine accounts of where they have breached international law and gone against human rights on other occasions is not sufficient as to convict them of this trespass. If you are to be truly impartial when it comes down to such issues, you cannot allow yourself to be driven by emotion, even if you dislike or even hate the idea of Chinese communism and what it does to China, in many cases repressing aspects of its culture. To accept an unsupported idea as being true simply because of your opposition to the defendant is not sound justice. Understand that I'm not trying to defend the actions or alleged actions of China, the Chinese government against the Chinese people. What I'm saying is, where the evidence is lacking, an opinion of fact cannot be clearly asserted. Where you claim a truth is, you claim what form it takes, and yet you cannot confirm with solid information